So what I am interested in sharing with you about today is true belonging, transforming ancestral suffering, and healing trauma. And there is a request to touch on forgiveness and loving kindness. There'll be a space for us to have interaction at the end, so we can bring it up, and if you have a specific question or a specific way you'd like to explore it together, we can definitely talk about it. And I know that William is going to talk about it in quite some detail later today also. So I want to begin by really welcoming each of you, all of us, to this space, to this hour of exploration together. And I want to welcome all of you, like all the parts of you, and all your ancestors that make up who you are. So I invite us to really welcome ourselves and all of ourselves right in this moment to this community of friends. And by way of honoring our ancestors, I'd like to offer this prayer from the Dagara peoples of Burkina Faso that I learned from Patrice Malodoma Somé, a shaman and healer. Yes. And the prayer is, may all ancestors join forces to put good thoughts into our minds so that we may see the good that awaits us and accept it. May all ancestors join forces to put good thoughts into our minds so that we may see the good that awaits us and accept it. So I would invite you in a brief prayer together to invite an ancestor that you feel supported by to come and be with you right now. This could be a genetic ancestor in your blood lineage, but it could be a spiritual ancestor or a land ancestor. Some being that has passed that is important to you. If that's meaningful, just to ponder who that might be and open a space of receptivity in your heart for them to come and join us, to support us, and to explore this topic with us. So a deep bow of honoring and respect to all of these ancestors that are with us now. So I'll offer some reflections and then a meditation on the ancestors, and then a chance to connect around our different questions and reflections. So my name is Kaira Jewel Lingo, and I use the gender pronouns she, her, hers. I identify as biracial. My mother's African American from the west side of Chicago. Is anyone here from the US? All right. And my father is white. He's from Houston, Texas. So I grew up internationally, and from a young age have really had this very central question of how to personally, in my own life, address the wounds of racism that have come come into me through my blood lineage, through my parents, my ancestors. And then also, after my schooling, I went to the monastery. I lived as a Buddhist nun for 15 years in the Plum Village community, learning with Thich Nhat Hanh and the monks and nuns. And then in the last 5 years or so, I've been teaching and practicing as a lay Dharma teacher. My full-time work has been offering retreats and teaching meditation and mindfulness. And this question of racial healing and justice has been quite central in my work in the Dharma, in meditation as well. And I've been living in Sri Lanka, in Colombo, for almost 2 years now, where I'm continue to be very passionate about nurturing community that knows how to practice racial healing and racial justice. So I just want to say I'm really happy to be here with all of you today, and thank you for showing up. Thank you for being part of this retreat. And I just now have switched screens to see who is on the call and notice Dean and Kareem, and Rahina, and just want to offer a deep bow and a deep welcome. Dean is as you all know, another Dharma teacher of African heritage, and a huge part of, we would teach these BAME retreats together, the ones that I had a chance to do in the UK. There's so many good memories. And Kareem, Rahina, also very key. So good to see you. So important presences making these retreats and helping support our communities in the UK. It's just really great to see your faces. So, so I want to touch on first what it means to find our own true home inside of ourselves. And because so many of you are here from the UK, and because the reality of racism and white supremacy in the UK is not that different from the US in terms of the regular state-sanctioned violence, neglect, and discrimination that impacts every aspect of our lives as BAME, BIPOC, people of color. I wanted to just begin looking at this and to say that the current fed up risings, as I've been hearing them called, that began in the US in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, they're helping, that expression is helping to expose, helping to bring light to the similar issues that are there in many other countries that haven't been spoken about so much. So I was looking at an article that had statistics about racial inequality. It's from the bustle.com, statistics about racial inequality in the UK that can't be ignored. So if I may, I'll just quote a few of these that may be already very familiar to you, but I hadn't read them before. So during the coronavirus pandemic, the Office of National Statistics released figures showing that Black people in the UK were 4 times more likely to die from the disease than white people. And in the US, it's a similar number. The last I read, it was Black deaths were 3.5 times higher than white deaths. And this article about the UK goes on to share about different areas of life. So in employment, Black Students who've completed their A-levels are paid 14% less than their white peers. On average, Black workers with degrees earn 23% less than white workers. Using identical CVs and cover letters, BAME job applicants had to send 60% more applications to receive the same number of callbacks as white applicants. And then on the measure of poverty, 45% of children from BAME groups are living in poverty compared with 26% of children in white British families. So that's a huge disparity. I'm not sharing all of the statistics, but in housing, homelessness among BAME households rose 48% in the last 5 years versus 9% among white households. Within this, homelessness among Black households was up 42%, and homelessness among Asian households was up 71%. 16% of white British households rent social housing versus 44% of Black, African, and 40% of Black Caribbean households. And this is in the criminal justice system. BAME groups were almost 50% more likely to be arrested under coronavirus laws than white people. Black people account for 3% of the population in the UK, but 8% of deaths in custody. In the last 5 years, 38% of BAME people said they had been wrongly suspected of shoplifting, compared with 14% of white people. Black men are 5 times more likely than white men to be stopped and searched by police in England and Wales. Between 2009 and 2017, white offenders were given the shortest custodial sentences on average. Asian and Black offenders were given the longest. In 2009-2010, search rate for drugs across the population as a whole was 10 searches per 1,000 people. For white people, this was 7 per 1,000, increasing to 14 per 1,000 for those identifying as mixed race, 18 per 1,000 for those identifying as Asian, and 45 per 1,000 for those identifying as Black. So Black people are 6.3 times more likely to be stopped and searched for drugs than white people. This is despite figures showing that half as many Black people use drugs than white people. And in healthcare, Black women are 5 times more likely to die in pregnancy than white women. Asian women are twice as likely as white women to die in pregnancy. Black women are twice as likely to have a stillborn baby than their white counterparts. For mental health, Black adults have the lowest treatment rate of any ethnic group at 6.2%. The treatment rate for white adults is 13.3%. So I almost feel I want to apologize for beginning with such depressing, maybe even enraging information. So let's just take a moment to check in with our bodies and be aware of what's coming up in us as we hear these things, which we may have known very well from our own personal experience, from our families, or from our study. Just giving space to this pain. So when we are in touch with these figures, these numbers, we might feel rage, we might feel helpless or lost or numb, or that we don't belong somehow, that our people aren't safe, don't belong. Recently, I was sharing with a client. I mentor people one-on-one, and he was sharing for different reasons in his life, he was feeling that he didn't have a home, that he didn't belong anywhere, that he didn't feel like he was seen. And our practice of mindfulness, our spiritual practice, is, as I see it, really to create a home inside of ourselves, a real, true, reliable home that's not dependent on the way people relate to us externally. Of course, that is important, and it's also quite unreliable, right? That's one of the main insights about life, is that it is unreliable, it's uncontrollable. We don't get to control how things are. And so the love, the acceptance that we may have found lacking in our childhood, in our families, or in our society, we can learn to offer to the different members of our internal family. We have parts of us that are exiled, parts of us that haven't been allowed to be seen. This could be our rage, our depression, our numbness, our grief, those parts of ourself that we haven't acknowledged, that we haven't allowed space for. And real healing comes from being present with all of these parts of ourselves, with care, with compassion, with the willingness to be there, to feel, even when it's painful or scary or overwhelming. So this healing is about not pushing any part of ourselves away. And the power of mindfulness is that mindfulness can be with each and every emotion or aspect of ourselves. Mindfulness doesn't have a preference of what it's mindful of. We do, our egos do. We want to have the, beautiful, strong, powerful parts of ourselves only. Maybe we don't want to have the weak or wounded or confused parts sometimes. But mindfulness is inherently kind, and it's able to be with whatever object of attention is there. So that feeling of being rejected, of being, of not belonging, that old Negro spiritual that talks about, I've been buked and I've been scorned, I've been rebuked, I've been scorned. That feeling, we can hold that feeling with great tenderness and compassion. And in that embrace of our love, of our acceptance, it begins to heal. So that's what this establishing our own true home inside of us is about. That even when outside there is much, coldness and harshness, it doesn't mean that we can't create a cozy warmth for ourselves inside of us. And it also, of course, doesn't mean that we shouldn't change the conditions that cause this harshness and injustice outside of us. But it means that we can be very well resourced from within to do that external work if we can create a true home for ourselves. So I've been taking a free online course in this spring with a Tibetan teacher, Lama John Makransky. And one of the things he shared is that the root of all fear is the fear of our own emotions. The root of all fear is the fear of our own emotions. So learning to be there for ourselves, to really listen to our suffering and learn what it has to teach us, allows us to transcend fear. And this is the key to establishing our true home inside of us, which no one can take away, no one can violate that. Then we always belong, no matter where we go, what we do, and how people treat us. We belong to ourselves. We belong to our inherent goodness. And again, I'll just emphasize that we also deserve and must create spaces that really work for us and nurture us in our cultural histories and identities. And I'll go into that a bit more in a moment. So I was very fortunate as a nun to help organize the first retreats for people of color in our tradition, which our teacher Thich Nhat Hanh taught and gave the talks for. And we put these into a book, which is a wonderful resource. It's called Together We Are One. It's by Thich Nhat Hanh, Together We Are One. And it's his teachings from the People of Color retreats. There's a chapter from me in that book. There's a chapter from Dharma teacher Larry Ward, an African-American Dharma teacher, also in that book. But in this retreat, in this book, he shares that when Thich Nhat Hanh was exiled from Vietnam for calling for peace during the war, it was actually the opportunity that it was the chance for him to find his own true home inside of himself by taking refuge in his steps, by taking refuge in his breath. This meditation that Reneke just led us in, those practices of coming back to the present moment, of being there for himself, were what he anchored himself in to really find and create his own home when he couldn't go back to his homeland and he lost all of his network of friends, family. He was exiled for 40 years. So perhaps the experience of not belonging, of being pushed out in some ways, can actually be used as a positive condition for finding our own inner strength, our belonging, our sense of self-love. And our ancestors had to do this to survive, right? They had to be able to find this sense of strength inside of themselves. And that's what they've passed on to us. So we know how to do this in different ways. And we can always, strengthen this. So I'd like to speak a little bit now about transforming ancestral suffering. As a person of color, a BIPOC, BAME person with a Black mother, for me, it's very important for myself and any of us who share this history of coming from groups that have been oppressed by white supremacist structures in society, that we don't see ourselves as a victim, and that we use the tools of the Dharma, of mindfulness, of meditation, of spiritual liberation to help us to transform and actually compost, metabolize the suffering that's been passed down to us for our liberation, for the liberation of our ancestors. So it's often the case that survivors of different kinds of trauma, like abuse, or genocide or rape, that there's shame in having been abused. Okay? And this is quite a process to work with the suffering of trauma, but with the tools of compassion, of real respect for our experience, if we can go back and touch that and really get close to that and understand that, if we're not afraid to look at it, it can become pride instead. It can become a celebration of having survived, of having lived through and made something beautiful with our lives. So I think especially of my great-grandmother, who was called Mudro. One of the grandchildren couldn't say the word mother as a young child, so they said Mudro, and then we all started to call her Mudro. She was born in Tupelo, Mississippi in 1900, right at the turn of the century. She was a daughter of sharecroppers. And she buried 5 of her 6 children. She lived to be 101. And she, as a young woman, experienced racialized terror, as you can imagine, in Mississippi during the Jim Crow era. So she fled as soon as she could get away, only to encounter more racialized terror in the north, with KKK burning crosses on her lawn in Michigan. And then she encountered economic terrorism through just extreme poverty, where Black people were systematically cut out of opportunities economically all over the country. So still, I remember all of the time. I got to be with her until I was well into my 20s. And I remember growing up, as I would visit her, you know, she had no bitterness for what she went through. She had a crystal clear memory. She told me all sorts of stories about her family, about the things she lived through. She would laugh, she would joke, she would tease. She sang in the choir at church. She was deeply loving and expressive in showing her affection. And even like until she died, she was super clear mentally. And the way she died was she just was ready and she stopped eating. She wasn't sick. She just stopped eating at 101. So for me, that's a huge legacy from her, that she survived all of that. The racism, the violence, the fear, the poverty, the lack of opportunities. And she managed to pass on love and clarity and a sense of dignity. She was a beautiful woman, always very elegant in her, how she dressed, how she held herself. So when we practice mindfulness and open up to our bodies, to our breath, in this present moment as something precious, right? Nika had us do in this meditation, really enjoying our breath, appreciating our breath. We touch that we are worth loving and caring for. Our bodies are really a precious gift that our ancestors have passed on to us. So when we listen to our bodies and care for them with good food, with rest, with exercise, with healthy touch among loving people, we change our history. We heal the experiences of our ancestors, whatever they looked like, whatever kind of privilege they had or didn't have, and we create community for ourselves that sustains us. So that's the possibility of what we can do in this present moment. We can create community where we can be fully human, where we offer respect and reverence for each other and for our journeys. So mindfulness spaces and Dharma spaces, spaces of spiritual practice, they can do this. They can offer this possibility for healing on all levels of our being, not just spiritual transformation, but the transformation of our society. But they have to be informed in order to have a response to what's happening in our world. They have to be informed by the awareness of white supremacy and how it works and how it shows up in dharmic spaces, in spiritual communities. Because we're products of our society, so we all carry the seeds of white supremacist thinking inside of us. Even as people of color, we have ways of oppressing each other, oppressing ourselves, talking about it as internalized oppression. And of course, then our white communities also, they recreate the same things that are there in society. They're unconsciously often recreated unintentionally in our Dharma spaces. So there's a lot of work to do to make these spaces truly liberatory, but there are more and more people waking up to this and looking at how to make change. And one of them that I'd like to highlight is the East Bay Meditation Center in Oakland, which I've spent some time in. But it's a place where privilege is acknowledged and addressed. And there are events that are specifically for folks of color. There are events for white people. But when they do general events, they send out the word several weeks ahead of time to their people of color lists, so that they give folks of color more of a chance to be there, so that the event can be as mixed as possible. So there's many different creative ways, you know, and innovations that we can do to help address the harms and address the inequalities and the injustices that tend to show up in our practice spaces. So in this space, like the East Bay Meditation Center, there is this invitation to claim our full humanity, to really show up as our full selves, so we don't have to shut down one aspect of ourselves to fit into the dominant narratives that emphasize privilege. So intersectionality is welcomed. Access needs can be addressed if we have any kind of access need, like chemical sensitivities or non-binary gender identities are welcome. There's this queering of our practice. That's a term I'm learning, where we really listen to the voices of queer folks and we don't center the dominant voices. So it's a place where everyone is welcome and practices are put into place that center the voices of those who've been unheard for too long. So in order to really hold this space of healing for all of us and all of our various intersecting identities in the present moment, we do need to acknowledge and give space to the trauma that's still there from our various histories. And I don't know the histories of those in the UK as well as I do in the US, but there's a celebration in the US of Juneteenth, which is June 19th, which is the date when sort of the last people who hadn't heard that this was 1865, 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, where slavery was ended, but many people hadn't heard this in Texas, and that was on purpose. They were trying to avoid this coming to pass, the white slaveholders. Anyway, it was finally told to everyone 2 years later on June 19th, and so that's become a commemoration of freedom, of emancipation, and it's called Juneteenth. And I'll just read you a reflection from a historian named Carlos Hill about the importance of honoring this day for everyone in the United States until today. He says, "I think that Juneteenth is a necessary moment of observation because our government, and to a certain degree our nation and our culture, has not acknowledged the trauma of 4 million enslaved people and their descendants. It hasn't acknowledged the impact this institution has had on this country and continues to have on this country. There hasn't been a national accounting. And I think the Juneteenth holiday is a kind of reminder of that. And it will continue to be a reminder and a haunting until we do. It's necessary, but it isn't sufficient in terms of what we need to do when it comes to acknowledging this history." So this is an invitation to kind of look at what might be some similar pieces of history of those of you who come from other places in the US or in the UK or South America. What might be some important pieces of historical trauma of your ancestors that are still in operation in some way in society that need to be acknowledged, that need to be recognized at a societal level? for real healing to take place. So I'll close my reflections by speaking about how we heal the trauma, and that the key is by being embodied and by turning towards and being there for our pain. So circling back to what I was speaking about at the very beginning. So we each can do a lot for ourselves in this process of healing our trauma, our ancestors' trauma. And we also need each other. We need communities. We need larger structures, societal wide spaces or awareness of healing for this trauma to really be addressed. Because that's how large it is. It's in the very DNA of our cultures, of our governments, of our institutions. And so it needs to be addressed by everyone and by in all levels of our way of interacting with each other. So, so much of what has allowed white supremacy to arise comes from disembodiment, comes from people being cut off from their own bodies. So becoming, first of all, intimate with our own bodies and inclusive, open, tender, receptive of our own experience. So if we look at the state-sanctioned violence that we see so obviously right now, the root of this is in unhealed collective and individual trauma and in intergenerational trauma. People can only oppress and kill and, prevent others from having a dignified existence. People can only do that when they're cut off from themselves, from their bodies, from their emotions, from their own humanity. And we can only stay silent and watch this happen to other people also if we're cut off from ourselves, from our pain. We know it's wrong, but we don't do anything about it because we're not actually fully here. We're not actually fully embodied. We're not present to what's actually happening. And we're not present because of our own personal pain and loss and ungrieved grief, but also the generations of people that flow into us who have been abused, who haven't grieved their grief, who have passed on their trauma from one generation to the next. So this is James Baldwin, African-American writer, who says, "I imagine one of the reasons people cling to their hates so stubbornly is because they sense once hate is gone, they will be forced to deal with pain." So there's a wonderful book that I've been teaching about and offered a course on with a friend. We'll do again. It's called My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem. Racialized Trauma and the Pathway to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies. My Grandmother's Hands by Resmaa Menakem. He's a Black therapist and activist in Minneapolis, actually, where George Floyd was murdered. But in this book, it's kind of groundbreaking, his work. He really explains how the reason white people could commit genocide and enact the horrors of slavery in the US, what became to be the US, is because it started in Europe. That between Europeans, there was an incredible trauma that was created in the Middle Ages, in the Dark Ages, where people were routinely, publicly tortured and brutalized and killed, maimed, decapitated. That was the way to prevent crime. There weren't many prisons. There wasn't much infrastructure to prevent crimes, and so the way they found was to deter people through the most gruesome punishments. And then there were the religious wars in Europe, where thousands of people were killed and tortured, and then there was the Black Plague. I mean, people lived through really horrible things that they didn't have much opportunity to grieve and transform the trauma. And so he talks about when the Puritans who came were actually refugees. They had had ears cut off, noses cut, tongues split for believing differently than others in their home countries. So they were on the run in a way. And when he talks about in this book, when those folks didn't heal their trauma, they blew it through other people's bodies in the New World. And so the whole invitation of the book is to make space, each of us, for our own grief, our own loss, to be present for and tend to the ways we have been hurt and hurt others. And that's how we lessen the patterns of disembodiment. We lessen the tendency to blow our own unhealed trauma through other people's bodies. And so this disembodiment that's at the root of white supremacy, it's not only found in white supremacy, it's also at the root of patriarchy and homophobia and transphobia and misogyny and anti-Semitism and Islamophobia and all our ways of othering. So our practice is to be with our own pain. And this is a key and necessary part of healing the collective and ancestral pain. And mindfulness, the teachings of the Buddha, meditation, can be so helpful because they are really about being in our bodies. They teach us how to be in our bodies, how to process and hold the pain that's there. And as well as, in addition to meditation and mindfulness, there's a whole burgeoning area of somatic experiencing, trauma healing work that's Western psychology based. So once we're no longer living in a state of accumulated individual pain and hurt, where we have this, overflow of things that we haven't processed, when that starts to get processed and starts to clear out from our practice, then the ancestral and intergenerational hurt can also begin to be cleared out and healed. And then we become like this transformer, not just for our own pain, but for our ancestors, clearing it out, the generations of stuck trauma, so that it can flow through and no longer clog up the pipes that isn't just our own pipes, but that become, our next generations. So as we do this work for ourselves, for our communities, our families, our societies, we touch into this collective will to protect and cherish each other, everyone, with no exception. That's what happens when we become safe, when we touch into this place of our true home by healing what we've accumulated in our lifetime, plus giving space for what's come to us from our ancestors to pass through. So this is a quote from Dan Emmons. He says, "What most needs attention is the part of us that we seek to avoid feeling. When we have tended to that, we are changed, and the world changes with us." So I'll end my sharing there. I had thought to offer you all a meditation on connecting with our ancestors, but I realized that we're at a time where it would be good, I think, to open up now to conversation and questions and reflections. And so, we have, I think, 15 more minutes. So let me open it up to what you all would like to bring to this conversation. And I will say too that myself and Sister Hai An, who's white, will be offering this course on my grandmother's hands. It's a Dharma-based book study starting September 13th, and we're making special times that will work for people in the UK and Europe. So you can write to this email, restoringkinship@gmail.com. I'll put it in the chat. If you're interested in joining the course, write an email to restoringkinship@gmail.com. And there's a separate track for BI POC and BAME folks, and there's another track for white folks. And if there's enough interest, there'll even be a group for Black folks specifically, if we can organize that, because the book really addresses the Black experience, the white experience, and police officers. That's what the book focuses on, and how to heal trauma in each of those experiences. Yes.
There are two questions. At the beginning of your talk, Anthony posted a question, and Nina sent me also a question. I can read it to you then. Now.
Please. Yeah, I didn't see them, so if you could read them.
No worries. So Nina is asking, can we make time for the meditation and then talk? And Anthony asked, would you be able to touch on forgiveness and loving kindness?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Thank you. I think I answered Anthony's question, sharing. We could talk about forgiveness in this part, and also William is going to give a talk all about forgiveness today. The first question was about, could we do the meditation and then talk? You mean right now? Was that the suggestion? Do the meditation and then have a reflection, or was, I don't understand the context of it. Okay, she's going to ask directly. Go ahead.
Yes. Thank you so much for your really inspiring, beautiful talk. I personally, for myself, I just wondered whether this could be an opportunity just to settle a little bit, even if it's just 5 minutes, and then just sort of see what comes up and share.
Sure.
That's all right with you and everybody else.
Yeah. Can I see some thumbs up if people would like to have just a bit of quiet time before we go into the next piece? Okay, I'm seeing some thumbs up. So I'll just let my intuition guide me, but I'll give us a couple minutes in silence. Is that okay? Thank you, Nina, for the suggestion. I'll give us a bell to begin and then another bell to end. Thank you, Nina, for the suggestion.
Is it okay to just, yeah, I just want to thank you so much. That was so powerful, so beautiful, so eloquent. You know, I think for me, I've had a lot of emotions with this group in terms of the acknowledgement of the whole totality of oppression and discrimination. And I've said a few times, you know, I'm very much into finding more about the African spirituality in the sense of that as the first people, it's never kind of recognised the influence, and on a global perspective, Black people are oppressed even within their own country, and it is such a hard battle to have that kind of recognised and appreciated. But at the same time, what I've taken from what you've said so beautifully is that it's not only about channeling your own energy and your own spirit within that is able to deal with all the kind of triggers that we face, but the importance of allowing that space that you can just find love in that and not be dismayed, because it's very easy the way the system has been created for the oppressed to become very much have almost the similar mentality of the oppressor, and things are becoming very complicated within society. And yeah, I just thought it was amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Surya. Hope I'm saying your name right. I really appreciate your reflections, and yeah, thank you.
Good morning. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
So, just like to share a memory. It goes back to 2012, and Ty came over to do a talk, and myself and a couple of other Sangha friends were beautifying Ty's accommodation in the basement of a flat somewhere in West London. And I remember you disappearing out of nowhere, and you spoke a couple of words. Hello, my name is Sister Peace. And those words just really calmed me down, because I was feeling quite busy with all the decorations. And it was such a beautiful moment. Just those 3 words, I've always remembered that. And I've always remembered how, you know, how peaceful you are. And again, I'm very lucky to have your beautiful, peaceful presence here today. Thank you for the informative and insightful talk. I found it very challenging at the start. I could feel that I was getting very agitated, and I almost wanted to type something into the chat saying that I was aware of very strong emotions coming up. And I think everything that you were saying right at the start really magnified everything that myself and my family are going through at the moment, because we're experiencing a very challenging situation concerning the police, social care, and it's just very challenging. I found it very difficult to stay with the talk, but I definitely tune into the talk from time to time. And so without sounding disrespectful to you, I was actually hoping for some kind of miracle answer to how we actually cope with in the face of white supremacy. And you said, just accept whatever is happening. That's how we stay embodied. I think intuitively, I've always known that. So I reflected on that for a moment, and then the word perseverance came up. Perseverance, patience, gentleness, equanimity, solidity, stability. So recognition, identifying, that's the beginning of acceptance, isn't it? If you're identifying, you're actually acknowledging the presence of the difficulty of the challenge. And often when we're feeling so much negativity in our minds and our bodies, we just want to run away. Because it's so unbearable that we just wish that we were somewhere else. But without facing it, we're not able to embrace it, as Ty would say. So thank you so much for that helpful reminder. So in the end, I did get a miracle answer. It's always been in me, but it just reminded me of that simple wisdom that's in each and every one of us that we have. Stability, solidity, equanimity. The seeds are always there, but we must always remember to come back to those seeds. So thank you.
Kaira, thank you so much for your presence and love and the work that you're putting into this world. May you continue for many years to come to illuminate all of us. For me, I heard also reading some of the book about white trauma, and I think that's also important actually to see both sides. I'm also, like yourself, of African European descent, and I do see suffering on both sides, very different type of suffering, but there is ancestral and traumatic suffering, and it's interesting sometimes that there's not very few models that actually hold all of that. That somehow we're in one side or the other, completely separate, but that somehow don't meet or not, it's somehow responsible for like some sort of collective suffering or some intersectionality. So I see at this point of humanity that we're not there yet. But this book is a really good start to actually say, oh, there is trauma and suffering within white collectives. They're not all beneficiaries, or it's not a black and white thing, you know. And actually, people of multiracial, but we are actually one of the biggest growing groups in the planet. So I think it's going to change this multi approach to trauma, that actually it's not about one side or the other, but some of us who are in the middle actually see that unfolding. Thank you. So at this stage, I'm wondering if we should have a 15-minute break before the breakout room, or should we go straight into the breakout room? So just a show of hands, who would like to go straight into the breakout room? So thumbs up, okay. And who wants to, I think everyone looks like they want to break. Okay, so I think everyone has, yeah?
If there's, well, I know there's not really time. I have, it might be, that could be useful for others as well, if anybody or if Kaira can answer it. One of the things that has been, and just thank you so much, there's so much I'd love to say, but one of the questions that has been coming up for me since the murder of George Floyd, it's brought up lots of conversations with a lot of people, but with white people. And one of the things that they say is something we're used to hearing said, you know, I don't see colour. I don't notice colour. And what has come up for me even more strongly here as I've been listening to you speak is that if you don't see color, and if you don't see my color, then you're not seeing my story. You know, you're not seeing my ancestral story. But I wonder what if you've ever been presented with that from anybody. You know, what is the best response? How do you? I'm trying to explain it with compassion, but it's not understood what I'm saying, and so I just get really frustrated.
Thank you so much for that question. Is it okay that we take a little time, William? Just a little couple of minutes?
Of course, yeah, you can take the whole day if you want. That's what we're here for.
Well, I'd love to stay on and hold your questions, because I feel like we didn't have that much time for questions, but it is exactly true what you're saying. If they don't see color, then they don't see you. They're looking right through you. And it's actually violence. They're intending it to be something. It comes out of ignorance, but it's actually a very violent thing to be on the receiving end of. And so I have a lovely friend who teaches interplay with me. She's African American, and she has a song, and it goes, "How can you see me if you don't see color?" And it's this whole song about how can you even, be my friend, or, if you say you don't see color. But I was thinking one possible way to help people relate to that is like bringing up other examples of how invisibilizing people makes them feel disempowered. And if one example is if you're speaking about the general experience of biological parents, and you don't take into account people who might be adopted, if nothing in your language accounts for that different experience, then someone who's adopted might feel very marginalized. If you're giving this whole talk about family or whatever, and you never mentioned that possibility, I don't know, that's just one thing that came to mind. Or thinking about if this person is from the UK, maybe, for example, if they were of Irish background, and if we would make some kind of similarity there and say, well, Irish are just like the English. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. They're white people. They have the same history. No Irish person would accept that, right? They would feel like their whole history was erased. And that's part of the whole colonial project, was part of oppressing Irish history. So it would be very painful for an Irish person if you said, I don't see the difference between you and English people. So maybe turning the tables and helping them see in an example that they might relate more to in their own personal life, it could be helpful. And I would also say, I know there are people in our lives that we love who have these views, or that are our friends, or that we work with. But I also feel like we have to protect ourselves too, and not put too much energy in helping people see this, because it can become so draining, and it can become just not a good use of our time and energy to try to help them see. And like, we can drop something in, out of our compassion, but then like, if they don't get it, like, move on, and I know it's not always easy to say that, because they might be people that are in our lives, even in our family, but also think about protecting yourself and what's a way for you to nourish yourself. And so what I've been saying a lot when I've been invited by white Sanghas to come teach, and now in this time of fed up risings, I can't not say, everything I'm saying is about race and white supremacy, and I can't not bring that into a talk. And so if I'm sharing in a mostly white group or an all white group, I'll be like, I'm going to say what I'm going to say, but you need to learn about this with each other. This isn't my role as a person of color to help enlighten you about race. And I saw this wonderful quote on someone's Facebook page that said, until white people see this as their problem and not something they have to empathize with people of color for, we're not going to make much progress. Like, this has to become white people's issue as much as it is anyone else's. And then we're going to start to really be on the same page. So just to say, in general, Melissa, it's not your job to help them figure this out. Like, send them to the white people that are doing anti-racism or white awareness, if it's possible. Give them a book on white fragility. Give them other white people speaking to this, because often I find that white people hear other white people way more than they'll hear a person of color. It will just go right to the core. But if we say it, it's like in one ear, out the other. In some cases, you know, they just can't quite really believe what we're saying is true. And that's inbuilt in them, and they don't even know that it's working like that in them. But if they can hear it from a white person, then some part of them relaxes enough to actually let in the message. So don't put too much of your energy, I think, in convincing white folks that racism exists.
Yes, and I would just add to that, you know, that's their denial mechanism, isn't it? It's serving their purpose. So you're rubbing against that friction. But in terms of our practices, isn't it even the more reason to have this collective refuge with each other, isn't it? That someone is getting you, someone is hearing you, and affirming you, and really seeing you. Okay. Any other questions? Should we just take one more? Like, I just feel we're just getting started for the day, aren't we?
Happy to. Yeah, Cosimo, please.
Yeah. I thank you first of all for your talk, and I resonated to your story about Technicon and just exile. And I guess, you know, a lot of emotions have come up for me through your talk on a number of areas, but the notion of creating home space has been particularly challenging for me, and I know for you know others that I know, and I'm trying to sit in a place of compassion, but I'm really struggling with that. You know, can you just kind of give me some insight on how I can maybe dig in a little bit?
Sure. Can you tell me a little bit more, Cosimo, when you say you're struggling with compassion? Is it compassion toward yourself, or how does that show up for you, the struggling with compassion?
I think one of the things that I'm involved in a lot of youth work and actually some cross-cultural work, and with a youth group I've been working with for the last almost 30 years. But one of the things that comes up is the diversity of the group, and making sure that everyone has a voice to, you know, express their opinion. And so I had to facilitate a talk with young people, and so some of the young folks were siding with the police, and some you know, weren't. You know, so there's this whole notion of here to defund the police. You know, so that's gaining some traction. So kind of caught in the middle, because my emotions and my experience with the police hasn't been that positive, you know, even as a professional. And so trying to sit in that place where I can kind of navigate that space and hold space for both sides. So I don't know if
Yeah, no, that helps. Thank you. I just want to acknowledge that I really feel the pain of what you're saying. I can feel for how hard that must be to be directing young people and having, you know, this task to care for all of them, and then some of them have ways of seeing that are really painful for you personally, but yet you're in this professional position where you need to hold them all, and they all are entrusted to your care. And so just take some moments to hold this with kindness. Yeah. Take some deep breaths together. Yeah. I just want to offer you compassion for the conundrum that you find yourself in, that is not it's not just, that you're I can hear a lot of love that you have for all of these young people, and yet I can also put the pieces of the puzzle together of how painful it must be when you have especially white young people who don't get the reality of police violence for folks of color. And I guess I mainly want to focus on you and your own emotions, like holding your own emotions, because you mentioned the need to come home and how that was challenging, finding a place of compassion. I mean, they may be young people, but they are advancing a really harmful aspect of our culture in that inability to see the harm that the police are causing, and so I would want to invite you, like in this moment, to turn toward that part of yourself that's struggling right now. Maybe even put a hand over your heart and just give yourself, care right now. And maybe you can help me if I've gotten the emotions correct from what I'm hearing you share, but is it frustration? Is it hurt? Is it anger? Is it sadness? What is that fundamental feeling that you're having as you think about these young people?
I guess it's a sense of anguish.
Yeah.
And just the repeated cycle, and so that whole notion of being in exile, that I've done a lot to be a part of this country.
Yes.
But it's not enough.
Yeah.
So
So this anguish. So if you're able to, just with me now, just to give space to this anguish that's here, it's showing up, and maybe it's in a particular part of your body. Maybe you notice it, somewhere more than elsewhere. Just bringing kind attention to that place where you feel the anguish. Just breathing deeply with it. Just letting it know it's okay that you're here. I'm not going to push you away. You can just be here. It's painful, but I know that if I give you space and feel you, that's where the healing begins. So there's almost a sense of leaning back to make more space for this anguish to be right here, to just exist. So,
this is great that your morning is really great, because some of us aren't even there yet. Some of us are so blocked and disassociated. They're like, oh, we're not ready to go where you are yet. The fact that you're here mourning public with us is beautiful, that we're all receiving and supporting and sending love to you. So thank you for that.
And I'll just add another resource is, if you have heard of the Liberate app, this is an app specifically with meditations for people of color. It's teachers of color. I have a meditation on there about embracing strong emotions. And so that might be a follow-up piece to this. But I would also just, there's the inner work and then there's the outer work. So I'll just say one other piece about, like, actually this does need to be addressed externally too, because this is not okay, right? And so one piece is just to ask you, do you have support? Do you have colleagues that are either working with you or working with these people, these young people, or that you can get support from? Because it seems to me that you don't need to be alone trying to address this as an individual, and that that other interventions do need to happen to, I almost feel like it's about kind of your safety also in this group, that you, as long as they're not understanding this, it's very hard for you to be who you are and who you need to be with them. And so what kind of other interventions, what kind of backup, what kind of support do you need? And do they need, and it may be a book, it may be a film, it may be, and again, it's not about like you putting all your energy into waking up these white people, but there may be other white people that can come in as allies or as accomplices, whatever, and give their perspective that you trust, that might actually be able to speak to these young people. But I'm feeling like you need backup. You need some other support, because this feels like, a little too much for an individual, especially an individual of color in a mixed group. Yeah, but I echo.
I have a support system, but I think probably this morning I was probably feeling it more. And thanks for having the space. And
So we're going to move on to our break. But I do welcome for people to use the spaces in between, to stay with this process, to stay with these feelings and the discomfort, that we are here to support each other all day. And so thank you again, Kaira, and we hope to see you in the UK soon. Please let us know when you're coming around. And the link to Liberate is on the bottom of my website. I have put a link on the bottom of the website, which is mnpc.co.uk. Yes, so let's speak. Should we have 10 minutes now just to go to the loo and maybe coffee or something, and then meet at 11:30, and then we'll do our half-an-hour breakout room. Anything else, Kaira?
Yeah, I'll just flag, I put in the chat earlier my website, and I send out a newsletter, and I've been giving a lot of talks about this topic in different places. So be in touch with me. I'll send you more things if you'd like, or if you just want to hear my news when I'm out, teaching. Sign up. It's kairajewel.com, and I'd love to stay in touch with all of you. I've really appreciated this time together. So thank you so much, William, and all of you for having me. Thank you. Only time, and who can say